Are you ready to talk about the differences between Maya's animation tools and Blender's animation tools? Because I am. I've been using Maya for over 8 years, and I used to teach software at DreamWorks, so I'm also going to be comparing some things to DreamWorks' animation software. My experience in Maya is way more vast than my very new beginnings in Blender, and I've spent a lot of time on my live streams on Twitch, diving into the two programs, trying to learn the differences, trying to understand workflows, and I think I've got some interesting findings. Now, I'm not trying to stand here and tell you which one's better and why this one's worse and nothing like that. The reason I want to compare the two are because, A, for any of you who are looking at the other tool, wondering what it's got for you, it's important to know the differences. And also I'll be comparing some stuff to the DreamWorks software because I think there's some stuff to learn for reason number 2. Blender's going to be making a whole bunch of changes to their animation tools in 2.9 and beyond, from what I hear. And there's a few things I really hope they add. Some things that I really like that they do, and some things that I still think Maya has them beat on. So today, we're gonna dive into that. We're gonna start with rig stuff, UI interface, we're gonna get into animation basics, graph editor, some stuff about hotkeys, and some wish list items that neither Maya nor Blender has, stuff that DreamWorks' software does that I've never seen outside the studio. And man, if Blender can add that in their software, whew. But what's up, in case you're new here, I'm Sir Wade, and I do a ton of animation stuff here on the channel, from rig reviews, interviews, a whole bunch of animation tips, tricks, advice, all kinds of cool stuff. So if you haven't taken a look around, hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell so you don't miss new uploads, and browse around the channel. If you're newer and you haven't watched a lot of my videos, look back and see what interesting stuff there is, because I bet you there's something you'll like. Or if you want to hang out live on Twitch, I'm actually doing a 24-hour animation live stream later this week if you're watching this when I upload it. And I'll also be releasing this shirt, which I designed. It's the Spline shirt. So if you like that, link below for that. For Twitch, for my Patreon if you want to support the channel, where you can support what I'm doing, get some animation tutoring, all the good stuff. For now though, let's talk about the differences between Maya's animation and Blender's animation. Starting with Maya, if we want to bring in a character, we have the choice to import or to reference. You want to reference, so if I just go ahead and grab a rig, it's as simple as loading the character, and there it is. There's our mesh, there's our character rig, and it's ready to go. I can just start animating. Where you had import and reference, you now have append and link. So I'll do the same thing, I'm gonna link a rig. Now this one's a little bit different. I'm gonna link the blend file, but then you have to know kind of where to go. Just go to collection, grab the multiball. Once that comes in, we have this ball, but it's not yet ready to animate. What I need to do is create a proxy. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I have to basically pull the rig out so I can actually mess with it. Love the F3 menu in Blender, by the way. But if I make a proxy and then I select the ball, also I can't just drag select over this. I actually have to click on it. Slight difference in color there. Turn on the display filter and make sure I can't grab the geometry. I only want to grab the rig, and then I have to go to pose mode. Now I'm allowed to animate the ball. That's a whole lot of setup for just getting a character in. I would absolutely love if Blender introduces a new mode. Now again, I'm very new to Blender, so there may be things in this video that you can do or that they're planning on doing and I'm just not aware of it. And if that's true, just let me know in the comments. But I'm trying my best here. And one thing I'd love to see is an animation mode where maybe if you're in that mode and you bring in a character rig, you don't have to deal with all that. It just kind of does all that for you. Also, I'd love to be able to make these lines thicker. They're just a little thin for me, kind of hard to see, to know where they are. Also, something different about Blender to Maya, Blender will take like this green object and make it a brighter green, or this dark red, make it a lighter red. I really like in Maya how it has a selection color. It makes it a very bright, vibrant, either green, which you can change and customize, or just a bright white. And maybe you can change that by default in Blender, but I find that much easier to see what it is I'm looking at than just making the color a little bit brighter. Just a personal preference. Now, when I'm working in Maya, I usually like to have two windows side by side. I have one that has my actual render view, camera view with no display curves, none of this stuff. On the right, everything's there. That way I know what I'm working with and I can just kind of preview on the left and work on the right. Now to set all that up, I have to go to the show menu and basically tell one window to have all these things and the other menu not to, and I have to pick and choose, and you can save some of that. In Blender, this setup of the workflow process is handled really nicely because you have all these different layouts. In the same way with Maya, you can also save different panel layouts over here on the left. Blender has them along the top. And then you have the overlay editor. Something I'd love, I mentioned this in my other video, I would love to be able to specify and say, I want to have the geometry wireframe at a certain percentage and this and this and this, and choose a whole bunch of things for my overlays and then set that up as a profile that I can activate very quickly and switch between profiles. That way, if I need to make a view somewhere on my screen that's a working view or a camera view without all the stuff, I can very easily just hit a button to do that. That'd be sweet. Maya doesn't really have a fast way to do that either. Whenever you make a new camera view, you have to redo all that stuff as well. So just saying. One thing I like about Blender a lot though is if I want to drag select, for example, the controls on the rig, I accidentally grab the plane. It's very easy if I have the toggle selection thing active and I can just say, no, you're not allowed to have that, you're not allowed to have that. And I can just turn things off right here in my outliner. So now I don't accidentally grab what I don't want. In Maya, I can do the same thing, but I do it through my display layers. I would create a layer from selected and tell it to be referenced, which for me is faster just because I'm used to it, but it doesn't make nearly as much sense doing it that way. And it's also a little iffy when you start to get a lot of different things and you want to have things in multiple layers. It starts to get weird. And there's stuff about hierarchies. I actually don't love the way of doing it there. I think Blender actually has a little bit of an advantage when it comes to choosing what's visible, not visible, selectable, and not, things like that. Now, this is the last kind of UI interface thing before we get into the animation stuff, but something that just drives me crazy about Blender that I really like about Maya, and you could change it, you can make it work, but Blender's hotkeys are all over the keyboard. And yes, I know you can change things to be industry standard mode and you can go to Maya's hotkeys, but then you lose all the cool Blender key maps that you're used to, that Blender's known for, that you have all these extra functions. They don't get remapped anywhere because Maya doesn't have that many hotkeys set up by default. And then it's hard to follow tutorials and stuff if you're learning, so I've been told not to do that, so I'm not doing that. For example, if I want to select this ball and zoom in on it, I have to go all the way to my number pad and hit that period button to focus on selected. It's not just in the little region where my hand is normally at, whereas in Maya, I just have the F key right there next to all my other stuff. They're all kind of right in the same little cluster. Blender, I have to kind of look and go across the keyboard, which doesn't make sense for an efficiency thing. Obviously you can change that, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about hotkeys later on. Now, starting to get into the animation stuff, here's a really interesting difference that any professional animators out there are really going to want to know. There's a huge difference between the way Maya, Blender, and DreamWorks' animation software, for example, use AutoKey. AutoKey, for anyone who's not familiar, is the idea that if you have an object in one spot, and then you go to another frame and you move it to another spot, the software realizes that that change that you made is probably significant, and it just records it as a new keyframe versus you having to remember to hit a button. Basically, it saves a lot of time if you are jumping through frames, doing all these poses, and then you hit play, nothing happens because you didn't remember to set a key. AutoKey solves that problem. And the DreamWorks software PREMO, actually, you cannot turn AutoKey off. We'll get to that in a second. But there's an interesting way that AutoKey works. It's important to know, and it's different in these tools. In Maya, you can turn it on via this little button in the bottom right corner here. But here's the deal. If I have an object sitting in one spot and I don't have a key on it at all, I go to another frame and I change the position, and then I hit play, nothing happens because I never set one initial key on the object, so Maya was never looking for a change. You have to set one key before you do anything to let Maya know, so that initial key is what enables AutoKey for that object. Which is why when you start a scene in Maya, you pretty much always just grab everything in the entire rig and set one big massive key. This is actually the exact same way that PREMO works at DreamWorks. However, when you open a shot, it already has that one main key on every control in the entire scene. Every object that can be keyed is keyed, and you cannot delete that key. Period. So it has to know that starting point so that if you go to a new frame and make a change, it has something to compare itself to. However, things are different in Blender. If I have an object in a spot and I turn AutoKey on, but I don't set a key on the object, there is no initial key. When I go to a new frame and I move that object, a key is created, even though I didn't have that initial kind of comparison keyframe, but it doesn't remember the first place. The first spot that it was at the very beginning, I had never set a key, it didn't have one by default, and so if I scrub through, I only have the second and third keyframes. It's still probably smarter to set that first key if you need it, but that behavior is a little bit different. Just in case, just want to throw that out there, that is the difference in the way it behaves. Now here's an absolutely day and night huge difference between Maya and between Blender, and it's something that I really, really am struggling with. I don't know if I'm gonna ever be able to animate in Blender without this kind of matching. And I'm not trying to say Blender do what Maya does, but I would like the option for this to happen. If there is like an animation drop-down mode, here's the deal. The hotkeys. If I grab a control, I hit the G key, it allows me to just move the object. If I hit R for rotation, I can just start spinning. If I hit S for scale, I can see the benefit of that. That seems actually really cool, especially for modeling and different things. That is not really useful. In my case, in my opinion, from my workflow and my experience, I'm never going to use that for animation, and here's why. So if I want to move this ball straight up and down, I'm not going to use G. And I know people are going to say, hey, but you can use like GZ and then move it up and down. Sure, that's cool, that's not bad. I actually like the idea of that. But for animation specifically, very often I'm looking really closely at my screen and I'm trying to keep in mind exactly where something is. And I want to be able to grab it and then move it up a few pixels and maybe rotate it just so, and be very specific and precise about which axes I'm moving something on, so I don't run into gimbal lock. But either way, I have to hit a couple buttons to lock an axis, and I have to know exactly which axis it is to say, okay, G, X, Z, like I have to know. And so if I want to just go up, left, and then forward, I would have to hit 6 keys in total to do that with the hotkeys. Because I'm not just going to hit G and move it, because I don't want it to be in camera space. I don't want to be doing it from the camera's perspective. I want to know exactly where it is. And I know I can just assign the hotkeys to have these manipulators, but that defeats the purpose of the hotkeys, right? And that's exactly how I want to do it. I want to be able to use the manipulators and be very specific about this. And I probably would have this be set to local because I need to be able to go up on the axis. So little tweaks here. But if I do want to move something around and then quickly go to rotation and do the same process, it's important to me that I'm able to be very precise and not look away from the screen and not have to deal with a bunch of keyboard buttons. I just want to quickly do it. That is one thing, even though Maya's hotkeys make absolutely no sense. Q, W, E, and R, like Q for selection, W, E, R, E for rotation, and R for scale, but they're all right next to each other. So our hands can just kind of sit there and go, okay, move it this way, rotate it that way. That's the thing, is I can switch very quickly through them. Also, being able to undo without necessarily switching the object or world or global things. I don't know, there's probably a preference for that in Blender, and if someone knows where that is, I'd love to know, because I know that if I move this and then I switch to local and then I move it again, well, if I undo a couple of times, it undoes that change to local. I'd like to know how to switch that just in case. But regardless, the workflow I really need to be able to do is to quickly switch between these, because I need to maintain that control and not look away from the screen for those specific moments. But here's another thing in Maya. If I were going to, say, translate or rotate, let's go rotate this ball, I can hit the plus and minus key, minus, minus, plus, 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 plus. It changes the size and sensitivity of this orb. If it's very small, little changes make the ball move around a lot. To make this bigger, it's much less sensitive. In Blender, based on our research, we haven't been able to find anything to change the size and sensitivity of these manipulators. The DreamWorks software was interesting because it had a different slider for size and sensitivity in the interface, almost like this overlay panel where you drop it down in the size and sensitivity, and you could kind of control some different attributes of the selection orb. I liked that a lot. I actually liked having them not connected versus Maya where they were always the same. Sometimes I want to change the size and not the sensitivity, things like that. Another thing that's very important to me is being able to just grab controls over here in the attribute editor and then middle mouse drag anywhere in the viewer to make that change. With this character, this bouncing ball, there's not a whole lot to show you, but if you have like a breath control or an FK-IK switch or something where different values are more than just your basic translation tools, it becomes a lot more clear why being able to grab a specific thing and then move it back and forth. And in Blender, I'm not able to do that. I can click and drag in this little field, which I can also do in Maya, but for switches and just various things, I really like being able to middle mouse drag, and I'm gonna come back to the middle mouse manipulation stuff later. But a lot of my initial issues come down to being able to be very specific about the control over certain axes. Now, I want to dive into one of my favorite parts of the entire animation process, the graph editor. I love the graph editor. I have a whole video on the graph editor. If you are a Maya or a Blender user and you struggle with the graph editor, this will help. It's done in Maya, but it's the same principle in both softwares. So I really like in Blender just being able to make a new window like this and then switch it to something. That is super quick. Huge fan of that versus Windows, animation, graph editor. I'm used to it, so it's fast, but I like the fluidness of Blender. Now, recently in a Twitch live stream, I was trying to do a bouncing ball style animation in Blender and in Maya. And I did Blender first, and then I had to do it in Maya just to make sure I wasn't going crazy and just to see like, wait, is that the same or is that different? Anyway, but I noticed a lot of differences when it came to the graph editor, and some of them drive me crazy. There's actually some things I really, really love about Blender. Blender has some amazing tools in the graph editor. It's also missing a lot of things. So I think both tools could really benefit from looking at the other's pipeline. I just know it's a lot more likely that Blender is going to add these things sooner than Autodesk is going to add them to Maya. Just as a side note, by the way, both softwares are good. Both softwares have their strengths and have their weaknesses, and you know, there's Cinema 4D and there's Houdini, there's a whole bunch of other tools. You don't have to say that there can only be one. Like, we can have multiple. That competition is healthy. If there were only one tool, we'd all be used to the same thing. We'd never know what else is out there. So having all these different tools is actually really good to build on top of. All right, just setting a key in Maya, hitting S and it keys all keyable attributes. Very nice. Blender, when I have to hit I, which is way over here, and then I have to select something, and every time I want to key something, I have to hit I and I have to select something. I don't like that. Please don't make me do that. Something that Maya does by default, by the way, in the graph editor, it's just why? Why would you do this to us? This is the curve that's created. If I go right in the middle there and I set a new key, do you see how that changes? Do you see that tweak? I just set a key Why do you do this? And I have other tips, Maya tips videos of how to make it stop doing that. The easiest way is just to right click and say insert key. That's the fastest way to add a key, and I do that all the time. That's like my fastest way in the graph editor. I just add keys all the time that way. Jumping over to Blender, if I have the same situation and I add the second key, I don't yet know. I did this right now. Doesn't really look like it's changing anything, but I did this in my other animation thing I was doing, and it did do the thing Maya did, so I don't know. I don't know exactly how that works. Fingers crossed that this doesn't apply. Now here's one of the most important things to me when working in Maya, when animating the graph editor, when animating in general. If I want to say, oh, I just want to see the translate Y, just the green one, I can just click translate Y and it solos it. I don't have to go and uncheck a bunch of eyeballs, because over here in Blender, I have to scroll this down and then I can't just say, oh, which one is that? First of all, I can't grab the curve. I hate not being able to grab the curve. It drives me, especially in those situations where you have more than one key on top of each other, like right here. This red one and this blue one, they intersect. If I'm forced to, like in Blender, if I'm forced to have to grab the keyframe to grab that curve to find out like, oh, which one is it that's highlighting or whatever it is. Let's just say all the keys happen to overlap on each other, and I have to start just unchecking things over here to figure out which one's which. I don't want that. Because also, here's another thing, is if I grab, say, all the keys in Maya, if I say, you know what, I only wanted to grab the green one, I can control select and deselect anything I want. I can obviously do the keyframes, which you can do in Blender, but I can deselect an entire curve or a lot of curves, and it deselects everything, all the keys on all the curves that I had deselected, because the curve is something that I can select and deselect, and it applies to everything within it. So if I jump over to Blender and I grab all these things, and I want to just say deselect this keyframe right here, I can control click or shift click or whatever, and I can deselect it. But what I don't understand is, why are the handles still there? If I move all these, it's still messing with that. I can't fully deselect it. And again, maybe these are things that I can do not in the default settings, I don't know. But for a beginning animator or anybody who's learning the software, there's almost always an aversion to changing all the hotkeys right away, because you're afraid you're gonna mess something up. I've been there, and this is not a very beginner-friendly way to have to do it. If you even can fix that, I don't know, who animates like this? I don't know, maybe people do. I don't know. But here's the thing, if I want to just deselect the entire green curve, I can't use this to do it. I can't use the red one. I can't deselect a group of keys by deselecting the curve. I'm left with no other choice than doing the individual keys, but when they overlap with each other, I can't like separate them. But what's way more important to me than that is this. If I have, for example, translate Y, I click it, I filter it, there it is, fast. I can just grab the entire curve by just drag selecting, right click, insert key. I can grab that key just with the drag select, and then I can just middle mouse drag up and down. I don't have to aim or be precise. I can just say, okay, that curve, add key, grab it, move it up. So fast. Versus in Blender, you can't do that. I can't grab the curve. I have to specify, okay, with a key. If I right click, there is insert keyframe, but I can't just kind of release to select. I have to then click it, which is an extra step. There's no like right click, middle mouse click, left click modifier. I have to aim and move it. And that just, it bothers me. It's so much slower. And maybe other people aren't as picky about this, but like for me, I'm just so used to just the speed of being anywhere in the window and just being able to move things around quickly. Just doing that really fast versus having to grab it. It's not that much slower, but it is slower. It's like milliseconds, but it matters. Especially if I were to grab a bunch of keys and move those, or if I were gonna do the scale thing and I was gonna scale them from this point, I can scale it from there right away. I can scale it from down here right away. I can scale it from the middle right away. Being able to use the middle mouse to do the transformation, scales, and translates and things, it's very fast, and the context-aware like positioning of like where that pivot point's going to be, I'm very used to it. But the lattice tool, essential. Here's what the lattice looks like. You grab a bunch of keys, you get this box, and you can just kind of shape them super quick and just move them around. Really great for bouncing balls, things like that. One more thing with the whole overlapping, but in a better way. In Maya, there's this fantastic feature. If you guys don't use this, highly recommend checking it out. It is a lifesaver. There are 3 ways to view the graph editor inside of Maya. There's absolute view, stacked view, and relative view. So hitting 1 on the keyboard, 2 on the keyboard, or 3 on the keyboard. 1 and 3 are the 2 I default to most. 1 is absolute. It's where you have one big scale, and if one value is really, 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 really far out there, everything else gets really small. It's hard to see things. This is a really big value. It's up at 55,000 units, and the stuff down here is not. So you end up having to like zoom in a lot. Not a super efficient workflow in general, which is why the view, normalized view exists. It takes that scale away, and every key, every curve, they now just kind of use their own scale. It maximizes the amount of space being used. That's why relative view is so cool, because absolute, you may not see everything, it may not all fit. You have like a character moving through space, big values, eye blinks, very small values, they don't all fit. Switch to relative mode, suddenly you can see everything in context, very helpful. But one mode, and Blender has that by the way too, they have the normalized view, which I actually like something about this better, is normalize actually moves things from a scale of 1 to -1, a maximum and a minimum, which makes a lot of sense. If 1 is the maximum and -1 is the minimum, it becomes very clear of exactly what the curve means, I guess. Compared to Maya, it behaves the same, but it doesn't actually have that at all. It doesn't remap anything to a new value. I do wish, however, that hitting the normalized view automatically took you to the normalized like zoom level, because in Maya, if I have absolute normalize, it just changes it. I don't have to do anything, right? In Blender, this is my absolute. I move this super far away so that we can only see this. All the other ones are really small in there. If I hit normalize, it doesn't look like I lost the green one, but it worked. In Blender, I have to hit the home key and then it will zoom me in to, what is this? I have a tangent handle that's doing all kinds of crazy things. Okay, let me just, and I'm sure if I am missing things and I'm not giving a super fair comparison, again, I'm not trying to like bash one or the other, I'm just trying to show differences. If I'm missing anything, I'm sure the comments will help me out. Be gentle, I'm learning. Another thing that I can't quite figure out, and maybe you guys can just help me figure out where this is, to just reset a spline and just say, okay, back to your default automatic like clamped behavior, just go back to whatever the computer wants you to do. How the heck do I do that? I've tried doing the whole like T, like Bezier, and it doesn't reset it. I've tried going V, like aligned and free, and I've tried all these different things, automatic. Oh, look, it worked this time. I swear I tried that and it didn't work before. Okay, well, maybe I'm just an idiot. Okay, well, anyway. In Maya, what I usually do is I just hit this auto spline and it kind of resets it. Apparently it's not that different here. My bad, cross that off my list. Anyways, what I was getting at is that if I have all this stuff here and I hit normalize, it changes. I have to hit home to then zoom out to see everything, versus if I hit normalize, see, oh, it's gone again. I have to hit home. It's an extra step I need to do to actually zoom to fit the normalized view. Also, if I hit the delete key, I want to delete the keys. I don't want to have to hit a menu. Did people actually need that menu for a reason? Like, I hate like hitting the button and like, yes, I'm sure. Delete all the way over there. I mean it. But I've been pretty harsh on Blender today. I've had a lot of notes, a lot of things. There's something in the graph editor that I think is amazing. So, like the coolest thing I've ever seen in a graph editor ever that Blender's got. I've never seen it before. If I click a curve, X location, for example, and hit the N key, there's a modifiers thing here. This is so cool. But there's like noise, for example. You could just generate noise, which is really cool. You can mess with the scale of that noise and the strength of the noise and the offset if you want to change it up a little bit, dial it back. You can then set limits to say maybe, okay, well, don't start until this frame and maybe don't get quite that low. That is so flippin' cool to be able to just generate that kind of stuff procedurally in the graph editor. I love that. That's amazing. Maya can't do anything like that. Like that's really actually super intense. Let me, dial that way, way back. And there you go. That would take so much longer in Maya to figure that out. But here's one more thing about Maya that I want to go back to, and I want to kind of revisit something with a new twist. If I have this curve, I insert a key, bring this down, cool. If I want to mess with this curve, if I want to, for example, look, I'm scaling. People see this in my videos all the time, and I get this comment all the time on my graph editor video, like how are you controlling that? How are you making that happen right there? All I'm doing is the middle mouse thing. Because I don't have to select it and I don't have to aim, I can just kind of highlight it and grab a handle and move it around. And if I break that tangent handle, how quick it is to just say goodbye, and then I can control, like it's very quick and easy. And if I want to quickly offset, I can just hit the cycle button. I know you can do that in the modifiers. I like how fast it is in Maya just to hit the button and then there it is. But if I need to make changes, I do have to kind of dial into the menus. But the thing I wanted to show is just how quickly I can adjust things with this middle mouse, but by holding shift, I can make sure that this either goes straight up and down. There's no chance of it going left or right, or vice versa, left or right, no chance of it going up and down. Now, if I come over to Blender, I can't do the middle mouse thing at all. And I also can't click to drag select over a tangent handle, which, To do that, there is actually a slight fix someone showed me on Twitch. If I go to view, I can turn on only selected curve handles. Oops, actually, no, whoops, wrong one. Not that one. Deselect only selected keyframe handles. And then I can see the handles for everything, which is a little bit cluttery, don't particularly want that to be the only solution, I am able to grab this because it doesn't go away. But again, I can't middle mouse, right mouse, or left click and drag to do anything with it. I have to then aim. But if I were trying to do, for example, this tangent handle along its path, straight out, straight in, or the keyframe straight up, straight down, left to right, it's not quite as easy here either. If I just click and drag it, it will allow me to go anywhere. If I hold Control, it kind of steps in either direction, which is interesting. I'm not sure why you'd want to use that. I'm sure there's reasons, but just for me, I don't think I need that. If I hold Shift, I have to move it first and then hold Shift. It becomes very non-sensitive. It's very slow, which is good. But again, it's not locked anywhere, so that doesn't really help me. And then if I leave this view area, it actually kind of breaks it. I lose track of it. It like jumps away as soon as I leave the context of that panel. And I know you can do the thing where it's like, okay, GZ. I know that's an option, but again, my problem with that is that if I hit G, it allows me to move with the tiniest motion, which with a pen, my hand's like slightly shaking at all times, I lose that precision. If I want to have exact control, hotkeys, I don't want to have to be reliant on a hotkey to make that work. I want to be able to control that just with tactile motions. That's the whole point of me using the stylus, is I can kind of move it and push it around intuitively without relying on other tech devices. Also, Maya has buffer curves. I love buffer curves. That ghost outline that I can switch between easily, make changes non-destructively. Does Blender have that? That's not a complaint or a comparison, like that's a genuine question. I haven't found that yet. Is that a thing? Someone let me know. I know you can make this actually more opaque. I think if I go to Edit Preferences, Animation, F-Curve, Visibility, right? I can turn that up. Yeah, so that becomes more visible. The thing is though, if I select the curve, I actually like in Maya how the curve lights up. It turns white. I can really see what it is, the whole curve. Can I do that in Blender? I would really like to be able to not just have it get a little bit brighter when I select a curve, because in this case, if I have it really, really hard to see, and then I select it, it shows up. I'd like to be able to see all my curves all the time, and then just maybe have one of them glow white. I like that. Is that an option? Can I do that? Now this is the last animation thing before I go on to the kind of DreamWorks wish list of stuff that I hope Blender adds. Maya has a dope sheet. The dope sheet of Maya is informational at best, and it does help you see where your keys are and what those keys are on, what controls. You can easily move all of your keys around, and you can scale them and do things like that. They're actually very useful. I've used that a lot. But beyond that, it doesn't tell you much. You only pull it up when you really need it. The timeline's your primary mode of looking where your keys are, and it tells you nothing except for the red tick marks. And if you have sync selection on, then the best thing you've got is if you grab a specific translation, rotation, whatever, if you happen to have keys on that particular thing, you'll see where those keys are. If you change to a different one, they disappear because there's not keys on that attribute. That's the most information you ever really get. Blender has these little gray areas which show you where held keys are versus this. You can also tag keys as like a moving hole or an extreme or I don't know, jitter. And what I've learned is you self-tag them, but being able to just add tags and have that visual representation, and it also just does this automatic things, I think that's super powerful. Love that. And I kind of alluded to this in my other video where I check out the animation tools for the first time. DreamWorks had this thing where you could set a key at different levels. In the same way that in Blender here, Maya has nothing like this, but in Blender, it's like this. All channels, I set a key on all channels. It's the same way of how in Blender, I can set a key that affects all of these things, or I could probably just set a key that affects these three right here, selected channels, right? Like I can set keys at kind of different levels. DreamWorks' software is built around that concept. It's not just a feature in this tool. The entire software works in this way where you can have, you know, maybe the auto key works this way. Maybe it's when you set a manual key, whatever it is. You can have it set a key on just the Y translation or alt translations or that whole part of the body that you selected, that particular controller, or the entire arm, or the entire like character minus the face, or the character and the face, or you set, you know, you move one little finger, it keys everything in the entire shot. You can kind of set the context of how big that key is going to be, or if you're retiming keys, are you retiming the whole arm, that part of the arm, the whole character, all the whole scene? Like, you have such control over your whole scene just by your timeline in PREMO. Really, really cool stuff. It was really confusing the first time I saw it, but man, was it efficient. Blender has kind of that energy, but I don't think it really does the same thing But if it did, oh. Now, speaking of things that you could do at DreamWorks that I really wish you could do in other software, there are a few wish list items that I have. One thing I really miss about PREMO is the native tweening hotkey. So a lot of us have used tools like Tween Machine or Animbot that have this where kind of move between the adjacent keyframes, right? Being able to just kind of shift left and right. DreamWorks software had that feature built into the software, and you would hold the tilde key. And it was the same type of deal where you would basically have your hand on that side of the keyboard, you'd hold the tilde key, and then you would middle mouse drag or left mouse click drag, I forget exactly what it was, but you would have whatever controls you wanted. You could have every control in the entire character, whatever you had selected, you hold the button down, you modify, click and drag, and it will give you a little visual like scale on the screen of like -1 to 1. And you can just kind of blend to the neighboring keys or however you wanted it to work. You would also hold, I think it was Control or Shift, I forget. You'd hold one of the modifier keys after you'd hit tilde and then you'd hit the other thing and it would activate that little scale that'd go -1 to 1. It would whoop, go beyond and then you could overshoot very quickly. So fast and so efficient. DreamWorks also had a built-in studio library, a pose library, animation library. There are plugins that do that, and you may have heard of things like that. There is one out, Studio Library. I've tried it, I like it. It's missing some of the DreamWorks features just because it's DreamWorks. Blender's a really powerful tool, and I would not be surprised if they could replicate the type of Studio Library plugin, add-on, whatever you call it, that DreamWorks had built in. It was the same kind of thing, where you could grab a bunch of controls, you could double click a pose and it would snap into that saved library, that pose that you had. And what was cool is different artists could create their own little personal libraries if they had poses they liked and they worked on, and then they maybe said, oh, you're gonna be working on that character? Hey, I have some poses that might help you get started. And it was a really quick way to not like copy animation. They're not like copying stuff. It's a starting point. It helps you get closer to where you wanna be faster, so you don't have to like, okay, I need a smile. Like it's not, you skip that stuff. You just get, okay, cool, it's a smile, let me customize. You just go faster. But you could apply it to everything. You could apply it to specific controllers only. You could also use macros. Macros are the reason, the macros are the reason that I miss the Studio Library, and probably the biggest thing I miss about PREMO in general. I never animated fingers, not once. I never had to like, the thing I do in Maya all the time. Never had to do that, except for when I was just tweaking and polishing, because there were macros. All the hand stuff like fist, like finger curl, or like this type of curl, just the end, like the tip curl or something, splay, shear, spread, split, maybe the pinky, I forget. All the different things you would do with the hand, thumb curl, thumb bend, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff, there were macros, and then you could just kind of say, okay, I want the hand to do this. Yes, yes, less of this, more of this, da, 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 da. And you just kind of like additive or subtractive that behavior from the controls, and you just go left or right and you just switch which hand you're doing. It was so cool. If there's any people from Blender who want to work on this kind of thing and like would like some input, I'd be happy to share, and I really miss it. Please add it. Tiny quality of life thing in PREMO, the home key did what Maya does, where you hit home and it takes you to the beginning of your shot. Which, by the way, just a useful hotkey if you didn't know that. If you're like moving around and you're like, I want to start my shot over, hitting home takes you back to the beginning. Kind of love that. And then for some reason in Maya, Alt-V is play, Blender is spacebar. That makes way more sense. So a nice little blend of those hotkeys would be lovely. Let me just double check that that's not the case. No, home zooms in. What does F do? I don't know, but not what Maya does. Because what does F do here? Well, it just refers, yeah, whatever. What I wanted to get across in this video is that there are differences, and some of the things are just that I think a lot of the Blender tools were not developed for animators specifically, or at least the tools that are there are older. And that's fine, because they seem to know that. They're redoing a lot of their animation stuff, and they redo stuff all the time. They're constantly making things better. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing what Blender adds in new releases for animation. These are some of the things that are very important to me. I probably missed a ton of stuff. I probably got some stuff wrong. For that, I'm sorry. I just really wanted to point out some of the things in Maya that we just, even if it is in there, a lot of us who are trying to learn Blender are having a really hard time dealing with, because these are just things we're so used to in Maya. And in a lot of cases, they work actually really well. But at the end of the day, there are two things to consider. On the artist side, our workflow. A workflow that you have been stuck with for a while, that you're used to, is very important. Everybody knows that like if you have a workflow you enjoy, you'd like to keep it as similar as possible to move over to a new piece of software. That's not always possible, but it's always ideal, right? Unless there's a better way to do things, which, you know, gotta be open to. On the other hand, I just spent this entire video complaining and wishing that there were a whole bunch of things different, and then you go watch the open movies and clearly they're not having any issues. That doesn't necessarily mean that the tools couldn't be improved. Don't forget that at the end of the day, the software is just a tool. You don't have to have the tool to do all the things you wish it could do. It's your job to see how far you can push what you've got to make it work. Which, by the way, last little thing about DreamWorks, here's a fun little tidbit for you. Did you know that every DreamWorks movie, every single DreamWorks 3D movie, except for Shark Tale and Flushed Away, I believe, up until Home in 2014, 14, every movie up until that point was animated in a spreadsheet. I mean that literally, a spreadsheet like Microsoft Excel. If you have questions, you want to learn more about that, come talk to me in the 24-hour stream, hang out on Twitch, I'll tell you the story. If you enjoyed this, hit this button so more people see it, subscribe if you haven't already, links below for everything else. If you like the shirt, now that we've talked about the graph editor, link for that as well. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.